Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, the classic 1974 tabletop role-playing game, the classic tabletop role-playing game that came out in 1974 and is going into its 46th year of tremendous success. And specifically today, we're going to talk about games with a player count of 1 and games with a player count of 2. All right, so why are we going to talk about this today? Well, one of the issues we're going to talk about specifically today is one of the reasons why we're going to be talking about this in depth today is a major change within the hobby overall toward solo gaming. Okay, within tabletop role playing game. So if you haven't noticed, solo tabletop role playing games are becoming very popular. You're seeing a lot of them in OSR. You're seeing a lot of and there's some games that have had tremendous success and really used solo tabletop role-playing games as specifically as booster rockets for their game that is specifically competing against Dungeons and Dragons. I'll give you 2 examples of this. So one of them is specifically, the biggest one by far is Ironsworn. Ironsworn has really done extremely well. Ironsworn is exactly like Dungeons and Dragons. It is medieval fantasy, right? But what really makes it, and it's also based on the Powered by the Apocalypse rules. It has heavy influence from Powered by the Apocalypse rules. But the Ironsworn game has gotten huge traction lately. There's a few other signs within the industry that tell us that Dungeons and Dragons games of 1 player, Dungeons and Dragons of 2, Dragons games of 2 with a 2-player count are a huge opportunity right now and probably within the next 2 to 3 years, right? So another game that has given us an idea that this is a really significant concern, like this is a significant opportunity, is the Rangers of the Shadow Deep. Now that's a tabletop role-playing game that is can be played solo as a miniatures game, right? Also, just so you're aware, there's a huge movement within board games right now where many board games are launching day 1 with player counts of 1 to 4, 1 to 5, 1 to 6, right? And the idea that you can play a game solo is really becoming very common within board games. So what does this mean for Dungeons & Dragons? Well, for Dungeons & Dragons specifically, you have this shift to a 1-player count or a 2-player count that is a possibility for our gaming community. So why is it here, right? Well, of course, recently, within 2020, starting in about March, a lot of people were staying indoors. They were going outside, and they really weren't gathering in groups anymore. So that really dramatically changed the shape of Dungeons & Dragons for the next 2 to 3 years, right? So one of the things that's happened is people are going online for streaming games, and that keeps these games socially distanced, which makes a ton of sense, right? But the other issue is always it has been an issue with Dungeons & Dragons where if you have a player count of 4, 5, 6, and it has not been uncommon for me to hear people. I had a friend who was recently running an Accursed game. Accursed is it's a Savage Worlds game, you play like monster creatures, right? Very much like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, mummies, vampires, werewolves, that kind of thing. So basically, and he had 9 players in his game, right? That's huge. That is a really high player count, right? So, but it's very difficult to pull these games together. It's challenging, right? Because you get one person out, then you have to either make some kind of narrative reason why their character is no longer there. Sometimes you're in the middle of a dungeon, there doesn't even make any sense for the character to be there, and then you have this terrible situation where the dungeon master is playing a PC or another player character is playing a PC. It gets really weird, right? So player counts between 4 and 9 are the norm within Dungeons & Dragons and have been for the 46 years of its game, right? So we're not going to talk today about player counts of 3. Player counts of 3 is just a small group, right? It's not super rare. You see it every now and then. Nobody aims for it. It happens, right? But player counts of 1 and player counts of 2 are a very dramatic choice on the part of the Dungeon Master. So one, right now, if we see a huge movement in board games towards solo board gaming, if we see a movement where if we see examples within tabletop role-playing games, and Ironsworn is this example. Ironsworn is a highly successful tabletop role-playing game that has specifically used solo play, and actually, just so you're aware, that solo play is like you're the dungeon master and you're the player, right? But if we see this movement, if we see that there clearly have been successful solo play tabletop role-playing games, and there are solo play, and there now is a movement of solo play even within miniatures, right? That tells us that these smaller game counts are a distinct possibility for play, and that the opportunity might be ripe right now, right? So if you are a dungeon master, you should really consider going to a 1 or 2 player count right now. And the reason why is, over the next 2 to 3 years, there will be a distinct opportunity where this is going to be more needed and more in demand, based on the rise of the solo play games, than ever before, right? And honestly, this may be, and I'll tell you right now, prior to the movement of solo games, DM plus 1, DM plus 2 games have really never gotten almost any conversation whatsoever. And really, they've been kept to romantic partners, right? So it wasn't uncommon for a wife to run a game for her husband, or for a lady to run a game for her partner. Romantic couples often would do this just because they wanted to share a story together, right? But right now, the rise of these solo games is saying, no, DM plus 1, DM plus 2 are totally valid games, right? And we could do this. We could tell these stories now. Now, the reason why I think Dungeon Masters should do this, right, is you're going to have the rest of your life to run 4 to 9 player count games. But right now, in this unique period in time, we have this opportunity to spelunk, to explore the dungeon that is DM plus 1, the dungeon that is DM plus 2, right? And I also think it may tell us, at the macro level, things about Dungeons & Dragons that we never expected, right? That we really didn't think would be possible, right? It may show us new aspects of the game, new interactions and mechanics between players and dungeon masters that we didn't expect. And so if we can get a high number of these games going, I actually think it would be worth breaking up larger games in order to do this, right? That's my opinion. I'd love to hear your opinion on this. What is your opinion? Do you think it's correct that the movement towards solo games in tabletop role-playing games, Ironsworn, in miniatures game, Rangers of Shadow Deep, in board games, more games than I can possibly count, there's easily 100, Terraforming of Mars is as a solo option, right? That the movement toward these solo board games, tabletop role-playing games, and miniature games says that right now is the time that is ripe for DM plus 1, DM plus 2 games, and that it would even be worth breaking up larger games to explore this in this unique opportunity where that may never be repeated within our lifetime, right? And also the idea that this has the possibility of exposing new possibilities for Dungeon Masters, for Dungeons & Dragons players. I would love to hear your opinion on this. Let me know your opinion. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.